Welcome back to Plotting About, writers talking to writers, going wherever the alcohol, the algorithm, or the action takes them. Today's guest has one of the best job titles in the business. She's a television writer, Family Guy to Salem, who looked around at her brilliant, talented colleagues in Hollywood and realized they were all terrible at exactly one thing: love. So she did something about it. Jaydi Samuels Kuba is a matchmaker, a certified date and relationship coach, and one half of the duo known as the Love Agents of Hollywood. She's set up dozens of couples and, in the most rom-com twist imaginable, accidentally found her own husband along the way. She's also the author of the memoir, Your Last First Date: Secrets from a Hollywood Matchmaker. Today, Andrew and Jaydi are getting into all of it, the craft of narrative nonfiction, where the line between truth and story really sits, and the big one, what the movies get right, what they get dead wrong, and whether rom-coms have quietly ruined real-life dating for all of us. Will they crack the code of romance? Will anyone get the ending they want, or the ending they need? Grab a glass of something. Let's get to it.
Hey Jaydi, I am so thrilled that you're doing this with me. We've been in the trenches together at book events. We know each other personally for some interesting reasons we'll probably talk about. And then you're the perfect person to talk about narrative nonfiction and romantic storylines.
Awesome. Yeah, I didn't know what narrative nonfiction was like a couple years ago. So it's funny that I'm the person that gets to speak on the subject with you now that I've been educated.
Well, that's maybe the perfect reason why you're the best person to talk about it, because you just had to go through the education in order to write it. And maybe
Totally.
the best thing is for you just to talk about your book, My Last First Date, and how that all came about.
Your Last First Date. And it's funny because I wanted to call it My Last First Date. I thought it was more fitting with the narrative nonfiction of it all. It's like a memoir style book. And so, but no, they were like, there's prescriptive elements in it. You want to speak to your readers. Let's call it Your Last First Date. So the title, that's a whole other conversation of how we landed on, because I could do a really deep dive on that. But yes, Your Last First Date: Secrets from a Hollywood Matchmaker.
Could at least just give an intro for your background and how it led into it, because I find this amazing and so fascinating.
Yeah, so for those who don't know my background, I started as a television writer and just noticed that people around me, I was working on the show Family Guy at the time, people around me were really in need of finding grounded, like-minded singles for their life partners. They all craved it, but had focused on their careers a lot. And the women in particular, at the time I was in my 20s, and I just noticed a lot of the men on the show were struggling with were satisfied with their dating lives or were married with kids. And the women had prioritized their careers and were in a position where they were getting to that age where they wanted kids and it wasn't happening. They weren't finding their person. And I was like, I'm fixing this. I'm coming into Hollywood and I'm fixing this. I was always a natural connector of people. And so this is a very long-winded way to share that I then launched a matchmaking company while working my way up as a television writer. And so I started doing both of those jobs simultaneously. Of course, there's tons of men that also, struggle in that department too. And the struggle is real, right? For everyone, whether you're in entertainment or not, whether you're in your 20s and your 80s, but it all started with like a select number of women on the show that I was determined to find their husbands or wives for them. And some are happily married now and some are in my book, and you'll have to read it to find out who's who. But yeah, it's been great. And so the matchmaking company it's been 14 years or so that I've been doing this. I date coach. And then during the writer's strike, I got tapped to write about it all.
First, I just want to touch on narrative nonfiction so we can define it before we talk about fiction, romance. Yeah.
Narrative nonfiction. So to be clear, no one ever sat me down and gave me the definition, right? It's just I sort of had to figure out what this was when they were like, this is what we want you to do. It is basically it's memoir style. It's taking aspects of the truth of my life, of my clients' lives, infusing it into a storytelling form, meaning I'm sticking to facts. Everything that happened in the book is something that actually did take place, but there's fudging of timelines. There's changing of people's names to protect confidentiality. Like if you're reading someone's biography or autobiography, everything you read to the letter is completely accurate. It's verifiable information. Everything that's in my book are real things that took place, but one character might be based on or is based on three different clients of mine, for example. And so anything that took place with this character client in my book, every single thing happened to one of those three people. But to tell an effective narrative in the time frame that I'm telling it, I borrowed stories from three different clients in order to tell this one character's journey. And so it's basically, I guess you could say, all inspired by true events. All of the events are real, right? But then there's a little bit of a playing around with it for effective storytelling. The three different clients also were clients of mine at different periods of time, but I made it so that conveniently I'm setting them all up over the course of the same year, right? That makes for, in this case, the way that I chose to craft it, I think a more interesting read.
So then maybe you can talk about too then on the writer sense, how you frame that, the idea of truth then when you're telling, because these are all true things, but as you said, it's like an amalgamation. And like,
Mhm.
what's the mindset? Is you're not, the fidelity isn't to the actual things as they specifically happen in order, but it is to the idea of what you're trying to get across in a larger sense and a more macro meaning.
Yeah, exactly. So, for example, one of my characters is somebody who is uh, constantly finds herself in toxic relationships. And so, this particular, her name's Mira. This character, Mira, in my book, is based on, in her case, two different people. And there's a lot more that I work with, myself included, right? There's different people who, I'm sure in your own life too, like who have found themselves in the same type of relationship over and over again. I think the term is called groundhogging, actually, based on Groundhog's Day. Like you just, wait a minute, I've dated this dynamic or person before. So this character, Mira, is more of a universal type character, but the stories that took place were inspired specifically by two clients of mine. What the takeaway is from her journey, and I don't want to give any spoilers, but I want people, I want a reader who is single reading that character and potentially identifying with that character and learning from her vicariously so they don't make the same mistake. I want someone who is in a relationship now or is married now looking back on when they were single and being like, oh, I remember when I did that, that type of thing. So I want everything to be as authentic as possible so that it resonates, the messaging resonates with people. And I think that, sure, you can do that through fiction, but I do think sometimes that type of messaging lands harder when you know that it's based in real stories and reality.
Do you think there's a line that you had to, was there a line that you had to find between where it felt like it was adhering to the truth or it crossed over into, okay, now I'm taking it too far, and so it's not holding fast to this rule that I've created of narrative nonfiction? I guess, is there an
Yeah,
elusive line, and did you find it in the writing?
it's a great question. I have a boring answer, which is I never veered from the truth. I had so many I had the problem of having too many amazing stories to tell, that if anything, it was more about dialing back and being like, okay, I'm telling too much truth, right? Like telling too many people's stories. I'm saying this facetiously, but the issue for me was there was so much that I wanted to put in and that I needed to kind of scale back in order to tell a more effective story, as opposed to, oh, like this story would be so much better if this character just said this or did that. There was too much saying and too much doing, and so it was more about selecting which ones were most appropriate to tell the stories I wanted to tell. So that was more the problem that I was grappling with, actually.
It kind of answered my next question about whether you found it, because you wrote on one of the most creative shows of all time and the funniest, Family Guy, which I loved and devoured. And so
I wrote
like,
one episode, just to be clear. So I was in that universe for about 8 years, and then my whole TV writing career was launched after I wrote the 250th episode of the show, and then I got the honor of getting to write for other shows from there. But so yeah, just to set the
yeah,
record straight.
you got number 250, which is a pretty amazing get. Um, Putting aside all the restrictions that you have in a room with showrunners, with other voices, but then you're writing this story, which is based on real people, and you're really trying to adhere to that. Was there any sense that it ever felt constrictive? Because I would think, like, damn, this story would have been so much better if those two met each other and found their match. Like, if only they had gone on that second date and I couldn't convince them. Maybe I'm speaking a little bit from personal experience, but like, was there ever a sense of like you were frustrated by your own clients because as a narrative storyteller, the story would have been so much better if they behaved in the way that you wish you could control in your fiction writing?
Yeah, so I mean that's the cool thing about getting the opportunity to write across various mediums. So with dramatic storytelling with a feature film or even a TV show, you specifically are looking to elicit different types of reactions from people that will keep them hooked and wanting more, right? So the goal is tune in after the commercial break or binge watch the series on Netflix, right? So you're writing to that goal. Family Guy, right, some of it's about telling hard jokes, and like the goals are just a little bit different. And yes, these those pieces are layered, and there's a brilliance to all of that. But in writing this particular book, my main goal was authenticity, right? And also to effectively share these stories. And the best way to honor that was to tell the actual stories. There were times where I did feel tempted of like, it would be better if Mira had made the right decision and done XYZ, right? If she had left this guy sooner, or it would have been more dramatic if there was like this huge breakup and she felt empowered and really gave it to him and said, like, screw you, like I should have, but that's not what happened. And I think that partly why people are responding to the book and they're really feeling like it's hitting home with them is because I'm telling real stories. And I think that if I did take dramatic liberties, the authenticity of it wouldn't have come across. And I think people can sense that, right? Like when you watch a film and it just is tied up neatly in a bow, it was really, really important to me that the three characters' stories that I share in the book don't have endings that end in that like neat bow, because a film will do that, maybe a series finale of a show will do that, but that's not real life, right? And so I wanted the book and the ending of the book and their stories to be as reflective of what those real life journeys were as much as possible. And so yeah, I was tempted, but then I would always pull back and say, you know what, it's better to tell what actually happened because that's what's going to resonate. So hopefully that's what ended up resonating.
So do you start, because you have so many stories over so many years of doing this, did you start with a list of, did you go down, like, I'm just talking about like process for a second here. Was it like, okay, I'm going to write this book, and your North Star was authenticity, and of course the lessons you're going to impart, but did you kind of start with the stories themselves and then seek out the themes and the message you wanted to say? Or did you go like, you put aside all the individual stories, and did you go, okay, here's the 5, 6, whatever the number is, lessons I wanted a reader to take away, and then go to your bank of stories and pull those in to fit them?
Yeah, this is very fun, by the way, because I feel like I've done a lot of these interviews and I haven't gotten a chance to really talk about the process that much. So this is really cool. Um, I
I'm
also have
glad.
to, yeah, I also have
That's
to
what
think back.
fascinates me. So yeah.
Yeah, no, it's, and you know, I know your background as a documentary filmmaker, like you're just really good at this stuff. So I can't wait to hear your other episodes, by the way.
Thanks.
Seriously, because I think this part of, everyone wants to know like about, okay, the book came out and tell me this, tell me that, but it's like, but how did it start, right? And as a writer, those are the things I'm curious about. So yeah, in this particular case, and it's, I have to think back because now we're talking a hot minute ago. um I wanted to figure out, I originally tried to sell the book as something very prescriptive, like people in Hollywood struggle with their dating lives just like you. Here's how I helped them. And by reading about, you know, XYZ, it's going to help you. I'll say ABC because I already did the XYZ. Spice up the alphabet a little bit. So it was like chapter one, here's how I helped them up their flirt game. Chapter two, here's how I helped them up their confidence. So when I took out the book proposal, it was like a robust 41-page book proposal.
Whoa.
I had very prescriptive elements in there. It was very straightforward. So by the time the publisher came back to me and said, we love your voice, but can you tell a story instead with that voice? Who, you know, you don't say no when every other place is passed on you. So I'm like, sure. But in recrafting the proposal, it was amazing. Like I felt like they got me. It was a better version than what I was setting out to do. And in some ways, the book wrote itself because, you know, I'm a storyteller to begin with. And I was able to marry both my passions through this type of a book. And also, I already knew the prescriptive elements that I wanted to get across. I knew the advice that I wanted to give a single person reading this book. And so all I had to do was figure out how to bake that into a narrative so that the messages would land in the most effective way possible. So then I had to think, okay, what are the best, who are the characters that are the best vehicles to give this advice through? And I thought about, who are the types of people I most commonly work with? What are the dating obstacles and setbacks that are most, you know, common with the men and women that I do date coaching for? Because I coach, I don't just matchmake. And so, you know, for those who opt into that tier at my company. So I then sort of reversed engineered it. I came up with a whole different set of like these, you know, these are the most common struggles that I think will be as universal as possible. And I came up with like the person who is constantly going back to the same type of person where it's like a toxic dynamic, a cycle that they need to break. Somebody who hasn't gotten over someone from their past and is dating through that lens and comparing everyone to that person. No one's ever good enough. And there's other, that particular character in the book, Kent, is somebody who struggles with other things too. He's a bit of a love bomber, you know, and so there's other aspects, you know, that I bake in. But those two archetypes, and then another person who I encounter so regularly, which is a woman who's in her late 30s to mid 40s, who desperately wants to have children, who doesn't want to choose a guy or a woman for the sake of having kids, but is getting to that age where that's a very real question that they're having to ask themselves of like, which one do I prefer? And now, you know, with the IVF of it all and my IVF story of how my husband and I conceived our daughters in there, which ties into this character's story as well, she's contemplating becoming a single mom by choice. And these are very real conversations I have on a regular basis with women, even in their early 30s now. It's very common that they're freezing their eggs. And so I tell these three stories. And then once I knew that those were the types of characters that I wanted to tell those stories about, I had to think, okay, now who are my clients that stuck with me over the years that fit these three main categories? And I really, I talk about this in the introduction of the book. there are people that I want to help everyone, right? You don't go into this line of work if you don't want everybody that you meet, that you have a conversation with at the grocery store, you want them all to find love, right? So I hate saying like I have favorites or anything like, but there are people that you get to know them and their stories and what they're looking for, and you root that much harder, right? And so I wanted the characters that I chose to be based on people that I really cared about, that even if I didn't wind up setting them up successfully, I secretly would check in on them on social media from time to time because I just wanted to make sure they were okay, right? Those types of people. In most cases, almost everyone that is in the book, it's based on some success story that I directly or indirectly was a part of, because I also felt like it was important that I be an instrumental part of the journeys of the stories I was telling, since I was a character in the book as well, which was something that the publisher wanted too. And so, yeah, I hope that answers your question, but that's kind of how I landed on these three people. I also had I had taken out a matchmaking series, very early stages, but had floated this like matchmaking series like a decade ago. I was working with a writer who I adore, Richard Haddam, who the two of us were coming up with this matchmaking series that we were convinced Warner Brothers was going to want to do, based on what the mandate was at the time.
Was it fiction or was it reality?
Fiction.
Or okay,
fiction. And so the two of us were brainstorming based on clients I had. So a decade, like almost a decade ago at this point, I don't know, my timeline might be off. Maybe this is 2 years ago. I like can't keep any of this straight these days. Closer to 10 than 2. But I also had this like massive Google Doc of, I had already shared with him stories of my favorite clients and the zaniest ones and all of that. So I also had that document to reference of, there were stories I wanted to share that didn't fit those three people. And so I wanted to kind of sneak some of the other fun ones in as well. And so that gave me like a good spot to reference. And then went ahead and did the outline and the whole thing. But yeah, does that answer your question?
yeah, no, completely. I mean, you sort of almost you had done it both ways at different points, but you definitely had you had the main thematic points already. So you started with the ideas of what the lessons you wanted to impart, and then thankfully you also had your history of doing the narrative series that you were like, okay, I already have all the document of the best stories that could fit it. So no, that completely answered the question, and it's so interesting to see how it kind of came together and how the pieces all fit. And yeah, I always do the same. If someone's gonna say yes to you and they're like, wouldn't it be great if you did this, and you're like, absolutely. That's exactly.
I mean, it worked out.
Yeah, it worked out great because it was perfect for your book.
Yeah, and I'm curious if you had a similar experience. Like for me, it was so different because you also come from a TV background and
or features, mostly features.
Or features, right? I should say we met through the Writers Guild. You come from like a film, TV, right? That type of screenwriting background, and so the notes that I've been given from studios and networks over the years, or that have been given to the creators of the shows that I've written on, you don't always agree with them, right? And you have to figure out a way to make them work. But at the same time, you're like, you're making the story worse. I was so fortunate that the editors and publisher that I worked with, like truly throughout the whole experience, were making everything better. And one of the best decisions that was made, I could have sold this book somewhere else as that straightforward version, and I would not have been as satisfied as the version it turned out to be. And that was, hugely a debt of gratitude to them. So what was your experience like with that?
Well, first of all, yeah, I totally agree. And when you get a note that works, it's like really exciting, and you like, why didn't I think of that? And also it was perfectly suited with all the amazing stories you had at your disposal. So it wasn't, for me, it wasn't quite that experience. The work, I was very fortunate because the work that we did with the editor and the publisher, they accepted the narrative as is, and it was really more granular in the editing process. So it wasn't a redefining or an entry of a new side of the story. It was kind of amplifying different elements, working on POV. You know, I took my feature background, and that's what came into this book, like very specifically bringing a narrative movie plot. So there wasn't really any issues with plot. Um, plot's my sort of thing, and again, like it winds up being kind of character work that kind of comes in at the end. But I also spent 10 years writing this, so there was a lot of rewriting that had already occurred before. And the notes were amazing from the editor. I working with him from the publisher was a dream. It was so different than notes that come from producers. You know, whenever you work with a producer or an executive, they have so many different masters they're trying to serve with the market, or what an actor or what the agency reads, or like what was the most successful thing that already happened. Like there's so much positioning that's happened that you kind of lose sight of the story. And
it's
then
a lot of guessing, like mind reading on behalf of the person above them. No, one of the best pieces of advice to me, which I think could speak to writing books as well, you know, if you get a quote unquote like bad note, is figuring out when someone gives you a note you don't like, what is the bump behind the bump, right? We hear that all the time in our field. It's like something's bothering the person that gave you the note. Maybe the solution that they offered is not really the most original, you know, or best approach, but the thing that was bothering them is very real. How can you fix that in a way that's maybe better than a way they've already thought of?
Yeah, I haven't heard of the bump behind the bump, but we use the same thing, especially in the veterans writing program. We say, what's the note under the note? So
yeah. Same idea.
Yeah, they might be saying like, you know, oh, I want your character to like blast off into outer space. And it's like, no, what they're really saying is they just want your character to do something. Like, you know?
Yes, exactly.
I'm loving this discussion with you. But I want to get back to the idea of like the challenges of matching people in the entertainment world. Is there something particular that you found that makes it harder or maybe easier than muggles?
Yes. I mean, I think, you know, as I mentioned, it's hard for everyone, right? So this is not to say that, like, for the person listening to this who's not in entertainment and they're like, wait, but it's just as hard for me. This is not undermining that whatsoever, because I work with people of all different professions, but there are additional challenges on top of an already difficult landscape. And that's, you know, a lot of my clients are on set for long periods of time. You know, they're on projects, they have late, like irregular work hours. So many people are freelance. So there's a lack of stability there. There's just certain things that when you're pursuing a creative profession, whether it's practical, like with the geography, or a lifestyle that's more irregular just because of a more freelance type of living, you know, these things can add challenges to what is already difficult. And so I'm working with a lot of people that grapple with those things. There's more. I mean, there's people in the public eye, right? Like there's a broad range, and that comes with its other set of challenges too.
Yeah, and it's funny because it's difficult for everyone, but I think there's also it's so much difficult at dating outside if you're in entertainment, outside with someone outside of entertainment, because it's really hard to explain what you do on a daily basis. and it's really weird, not to mention the personalities, and there's a lot of normalization of things that outside of Los Angeles, there are stereotypes for a reason, maybe. But yeah, I've found that people that I've dated that aren't writers or in the creative world, like when you try to tell them about, like, there's a fascination that's why like TMZ exists, because everyone's fascinated with this world. But then like the practical day-to-day stuff, you know, it's the pursuit of what you're doing might seem like a fantasy to other people, like, oh, like, because there is a certain mindset that you have to do this day in, day out, year in, year out, and what you put up with, that maybe doesn't compute with other people outside this industry. And also because it's just weird to begin with. So I don't know.
I know it's there's couples that I've set up where both people are in the industry, and that comes with its own kind of headaches. And then there's couples where one person is and one person's not. And so that creates sometimes an imbalance of power or dynamic where one person has that like 9 to 5, they clock in and out, you know, the other side of the coin is refreshing, right? And there's a lot of pros that come with it, and you get to see your partner pursuing their dreams and in many cases doing some pretty incredible things. But then there's a lack of stability sometimes. Like you could make tons of money for weeks and then nothing for months, you know? So it's having a partner that has that type of stability is great, but also having a partner who understands what you're doing is also great, right? On that level. So there's pros and cons to both types of relationships in the industry.
Okay, so this is a bit writers dating other writers. Best
Yeah.
idea or the worst idea?
Well, that's what I'm saying. It could be either, right? It depends on the pairing. There's a couple friend of ours that just had a baby where they are a writing team, and they have a fantastic marriage and relationship, and they work so well creatively, and they totally get each other, and they get to be around each other all the time, and they don't drive each other crazy that I know of. So, you know, that's really incredible and wonderful and special. And for some people that would be terrible, you know? So it just depends on the couple. I think that, and that's something that I've learned over the years too, is just when you think you have figured out what works and what doesn't work, you meet someone that's an exception. And so you constantly have to be on your toes as a matchmaker, in this field or otherwise. Human behavior is unpredictable.
The flaws that you're talking about, you're trying to solve in your last first date, like you said, the groundhogging or the love bombing, and it's like mistakes people make in choosing who they're going to date, like the over and over again. You said, could that be a nice reflection of a character? Do you find people's characters are revealing in who they match themselves with? Could it be an interesting way of accessing a character by kind of understanding the choices they make in their relationships? Is that a good
Oh,
reflection
yeah.
of the person?
100%. Yes. I think, you know, I went to screenwriting school at USC for my undergrad. They give you so many tips and tricks for crafting character and like the things that you should think about with backstory and all of that. But certainly, like, in terms of my matchmaking and date coaching experience has really informed my writing and vice versa, because when I'm writing, there are so many things that I have had to ask people over the years to get to know them better and figure out what they're looking for in a partner, that were questions that I never thought of when I was building a character for a narrative. And so now when I'm crafting characters, there are things that when it comes to their backstory or their motivations or anything about their present that I never used to contemplate, that because I've built up, and maybe you've experienced this with making documentaries, where you start to uncover truths and you start to get better at asking the questions, and it makes you a better writer, because how could that not help you build character? And then the other way around too, right? Like writing has helped me get to know people in real life and get to know what makes them tick, because I already had that sort of storyteller brain. So it all sort of just informs the other.
Because just taking it into like fiction and romantic relationships, what I find so interesting, and it's for me the dramatic, and you can disagree with this, the dramatic engine of a romantic story is will they or won't they get together, but then it usually always turns around as a reflection on the characters and what their flaws are. And it's like what you're saying, if someone keeps choosing someone who is abusive, and you're like, oh my god, every time they're with that partner, they're awful, they're emotionally an abusive person, and it's just, you can't just say, oh, it's so unfortunate that it's an accident she keeps choosing someone who's emotionally abusive. But like, you have to turn back around and look at what's going on in the character themselves, that they're making that choice over
Right.
and over again. And it's sort of, for me, that the will they or won't they top story of a romantic storyline underneath that is like, what is inside of a person that's blocking themselves from getting to the perfect romantic
Yes.
relationship.
That makes me think of my best friend's wedding. Did you watch that ever?
Oh my god, I think a long time ago.
Is it
It's
fair to share a spoiler from like our
Please do it.
childhood with
Yeah.
listeners? Because I feel like if you have not seen my best friend, they are remaking it. So I'm like, kind of, for a new audience, maybe they'll change the ending. Okay, I'm just going to share. If you don't want to hear the spoiler to my best friend's wedding from what, the 90s or
90s,
whenever
I
it was
think.
made.
Yeah, that's why I was like a long time ago for
Yeah,
me.
just jump ahead like a couple minutes. But basically, with Julia Roberts' character, and it's crazy, by the way. I was asked about this, about the sequel for, it was like the Huffington Post or Daily Mail or something about, you know, as a dating coach, what's your opinion of the remake, you know, they're doing for My Best Friend's Wedding? Does the original hold up? So I found myself rewatching it. And I was like, this is bananas, because the whole time you're rooting for a woman to break up an engagement, right? And now as a married woman, I'm like, why was I rooting for Julia Roberts? But basically, she and her best friend in the movie, when they're younger, make a pact that if they're both single at a certain age, they'll marry each other. The birthdays roll around. She gets a phone call. She's like, he's going to propose. And it turns out he's sharing that he is engaged to a woman that he basically just met, and Cameron Diaz. And so it's like Dermot Mulroney, Cameron Diaz, and Julia Roberts. So she becomes the equivalent of the maid of honor, like the best woman for him, and flies out for the wedding. And all she tries to do is sabotage this marriage and this impending marriage. And so the whole time you're rooting for her to break them up, and the satisfying, which should be the satisfying romantic comedy ending, is she breaks them up and she gets to marry her best friend who she realizes she's in love with. It's not what happens. And what ends up happening, they were so ahead of their time in a way, that the feminism of it all, of her trying to like ruin Cameron Diaz's life, that's a whole other thing that we could get into. But in terms of storytelling and just what you were speaking to about, you know, learning a lesson or getting out of breaking a toxic cycle, like, it's not that satisfying romantic ending, but it is satisfying because you get to watch her grow in the end. I'm gonna not fully spoil it.
Yeah.
But she doesn't end up with a guy, right? But the way in which it unfolds, I think, is cool. And so, yeah, it's rare that you get to watch a film that's a romantic comedy where the characters, whether it's by choice or they're forced into a realization, we don't get to watch those epiphanies very often. But that's what happens in life more so than not.
To me, one of the best romantic movies, romance, and it's not even, it's sort of beyond that as just one specific genre, is When Harry Met Sally. And the idea is like, of course, it's like, will they, won't they, over years and years, but it's really about them being able to grow into the people that can finally be together.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of an interesting thing why they do the runner with the older couples. I think, you know, there's other reasons too, but for me, that's what I took away out of it. And I feel like if you're going to tell a romantic story or a romance, and please jump in with your experience too, because you have this amazing experience of actually watching real couples, what actually makes sparks, what don't work. And I have so many questions about whether romantic movies have actually ruined real life dating, or we could say that's purely the dating apps.
The answer, but
the idea of like constructing a romantic storyline, whether it's your B story or your main, if it is a romance movie or romance book, romantasy, is understanding first what's wrong with the person who's trying to find love versus the idea of the trajectory of meeting your match and, you know, the happily ever after that comes thereafter.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many people come to me where they want matchmaking, right? They want the perfect person handed to them on a silver platter. And I'm like, I will try my best to do that, but also, are you interested in date coaching? And so many people are like, I'm a great dater, I don't need a dating coach. And when you really unpack it, not all of these people, but some of them, right? I have some women, for example, that come to me, they are the whole package. They are gorgeous, successful, funny, like all the things, right? But they're choosing
so why are you still single?
Yeah, they're choosing all the wrong people. And they look at it as like, I am perfect, I don't need to change. And they probably don't, in terms of how they are, right? How they're presenting, I should say, on a date. Like, everyone wants a second date with them. And I have guys like this too. But what they're asking for is not, it doesn't have that recipe for long-term happiness. And so they keep hitting a wall and they think, oh, I don't need coaching. I'm great the way I am. Everyone wants to go out with me again. Well, yeah, everyone that you're choosing to go on a date with, but you're not choosing the right people to go on a date with. And therefore, I really do think it's like getting your teeth cleaned. Like, no one thinks it's weird to get your teeth cleaned regularly. I think with dating, there's always things to improve about yourself and what you're looking for and what you're open to. The thing for me when I was younger, I had a few things, but one of them is I was ridiculous about height. I am 5'2 3/4", and I literally, before my husband, did not go on a single date with a guy who is under 5'10", which is ridiculous. But I was convinced that that was like all I could be attracted to. Ridiculous. Totally fell for my husband, who was someone that I met in person, and he was a client that's in my book. But another thing was like, I did not know how to signal interest. I would show up in front of a guy that I liked on a date and I would be so stiff and I would look disinterested because I was so nervous that I would like sit up straight. My face would be super stoic. I would be so worried about making the wrong move. And it looked like I didn't want to be there, which is so counterintuitive to getting another date. And so there's so many people that have so much to offer, but they have a nervous dating habit, or they don't know how to signal interest, or they're choosing all the wrong people, or there's an insecurity that's coming out sideways, right? And those are the types of things that I help people with on their journeys. It could be as simple as helping them perfect their dating profile to portray themselves more authentically. But whatever it is, I completely agree with you that, they're looking for that sort of silver bullet when really it's within. And sometimes people can figure that out for themselves and make the improvements themselves. And sometimes it takes the sidekick in a rom-com to kick them into gear.
It's so funny because everything you're saying, it feels like what you do at the beginning of a movie or a book, of like where you put your character. And then the idea is like what you're saying, how do you find that moment of realization where they begin to actually change and grow? Which is why I think that's like the perfect construction for, I mean, all these things that you're talking about. Oh, she was obsessed with height. She didn't think she could ever fall in love with someone over 5'11". And then, it's like, that's like the perfect, like and then cue Julia Roberts meeting Danny
Right.
DeVito, like.
Right. And then, no, seriously. And then you talked about When Harry Met Sally. There's some things that people will hold up as like, this is the ultimate romantic story. Like one you hear a lot is Romeo and Juliet, right? As a kid, you're like, that's the ultimate romance. And it's like, I'm sorry, do you want to die in the end meeting your forever person? Like, that's not romantic. That's like a horror film, right? And it's the same in a way with When Harry Met Sally. Everyone's like, you watch it and you're like, I want that. Like, I want to realize that I'm in love with my best friend. But it takes place over what, like 2 decades? Like, how long does that story take place?
Yeah,
I
exactly.
don't want my clients suffering for 20 years before they find their person, right? So a lot of these stories that we are told and we watch and we consume voraciously as kids, whether we're reading it or we're watching it, that is not actually what you want in real life, right? There's someone very close to me who is really into like Korean soaps, and there's so much heartache in them. And, he's like, that's what I want. I want that kind of love. I'm like, you do not actually, right? Like, you want the resulting love. You want the ending. But I want everyone to get to it a lot quicker, and I don't want you to die in the end.
And that is my biggest frustration with romantic movies and how it's infiltrated into dating. Like, I feel like there's the Disney complex. Like, you're with someone and they feel like everything should be fireworks and bursting at once,
Right.
or it has to be very dramatic and there's like swept off your feet and something magical supposed to happen. I I'm in search of a question here, but it's more just the idea of, I don't know. It's like how much do we like, are these tropes important and necessary in movies and books, or, you know, and are they ruining real life and vice versa? Like how much it's I don't know. As a person who's dating, it's very frustrating to me because I feel like, yeah, you watch these and then you're aching for that, like your client was
Mhm.
saying about that. Full disclosure, I'm also your client.
Surprise.
Surprise.
And by the way, I talked about people that I extra root for, right? Like you're squarely in that category. Like nothing will make me happier than 2026. We are nailing this for you, Andrew.
I
So
appreciate it. Oh my God.
yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess what do you see as someone who is on both sides of this, as a writer, as a storyteller, as a matchmaker who's seen all this up close? Like, do you think our romantic depictions get it wrong, get it right? Like, what are the tropes that you think, you know, when do you find yourself leaning into them when you're writing these stories, and then bump up against the reality that you know from your professional matchmaking?
I think there's a difference between what I love to watch and what I write. Um, so, for example, I love watching horror, thrillers, really dramatic TV shows, but I write more comedy and I write things that are lighter. It's the same thing with, is there room for the rom-coms that I grew up on, that I wanted those relationships and fantasized about as a kid because I grew up watching that? I think there's absolutely room for that. Those are not the stories that I write, though. Like I tend to write things that are more reflective of reality, and it's hard not to, given what I do, you know, for a living in addition. And so I think there's room for all of it. I think it's more a question of, now I'm a parent. I have a 4-year-old daughter who's obsessed with princesses. Thank goodness the modern day princesses that Disney's rolled out, um, they save themselves, they have magical powers, they're fighting monsters, you know, like it's so awesome. I didn't get to have that as a kid, right? And I have a lot of peers that hold their partners to really unreasonable relationship standards because they're not doing everything that Prince Charming would have done, right? Um, so I think part of it is a parent's responsibility in terms of what they are exposing their children to. I don't think our parents knew any better. And they also didn't have that much to choose from. Like all the messaging was sort of the same, aside from the my best friend's wedding and, you know, random like one-offs. It was mostly, you know, woman's in trouble, guy comes along and rescues her, and that was the story. That was the ultimate dream, the ultimate romance. Now there's so many other stories that are told. And so I think it has to do with like what parents are exposing their kids to. And then when the kids are old enough to realize like, okay, yeah, these are just stories. I think I'm living out a fantasy, right? But like the realistic version of a fantasy. My husband is not scaling buildings for me, you know. He would, I'd like to think he would, but he's not having to do that in real life. I'm with my Prince Charming, but he's not like riding a horse, and he's not, you know what I mean? Like, I think that it's all about perspective and reframing the narrative and recognizing metaphor and fantasy and separating, and wanting what a dynamic is, maybe, as opposed to the actual execution of that dynamic. But to have a healthy mindset, we need our kids and, you know, singles and all of that. We need people to be consuming a variety of content. And I think the rom-coms back then just only had two types of characters and one type of an ending. And it's evolved. I think the genre's evolved. Not as much as I would hope. I don't know if you saw Materialist this summer, but
Oh, I wanted to ask you about that. Big time.
yeah, I
that
do a
was
whole podcast episode on that. My husband and I have a podcast called Match Made in Hollywood, and we dissect that in great detail. But no, we could chat about that briefly. I love that she went there with some of the darkness with the B story, But then the love triangle was your stereotypical love triangle that I watched when I was 10, and took all the wrong messaging from. And that's not to say it's a storyteller's responsibility to always share the positive message and for the character to do the right thing. But I felt like there was an opportunity for the character to grow in a way that would have also serviced other storylines. And the character just basically reverted and made what I think was a terrible decision that for some reason, I mean, I guess we're getting into it, right? I'll get into it.
Go for it. I have my opinion. I've
Yeah,
got a
there's a
very
lot
strong
of there's a
opinion
lot
about
of
that movie.
layers to the movie, and there's a lot I loved about the movie, but what I didn't love was the choice she made in the end. And basically, again, another spoiler, skip ahead if you don't want to hear it, but the character is Dakota Johnson's character is choosing between Pedro Pascal and Chris Evans. And Chris Evans is that like toxic relationship from when she's younger. He is the exact same person today as he was when they broke up. They fought all the time. He couldn't hold a job or was a struggling actor type. And then she meets Pedro Pascal, who's this like metaphorical knight in shining armor. He's wealthy, he's handsome, he treats her kindly. And she chooses to be with Chris Evans in the end. And I wouldn't have had a problem with that if, as an audience, it was written in a way where you're like, no, don't do that. But it's almost like the writer chose for the audience to root, like she was writing toward you rooting for her to get back with Chris Evans. And I could not figure out why. This man was all kinds of wrong for her, but was made to glorify, like that was the right choice, was re-entering this toxic relationship where there was not even maybe like a slight hope that things would change. So I think the character made the wrong decision. I would have been okay with it if we were rooting for her and she made the wrong decision and we knew she was making the wrong decision, but that's just not what the writing was speaking toward. So that was my main issue with the love triangle.
No, that's really fascinating. I just thought it sort of I thought and kind of, not to repeat what you just said, but it leaned so heavily on stereotypes and it felt so, it was trying to tell a story about the idea of vapidness and authenticity, but it kept not hitting that mark. And instead it felt like the story itself was an example of it versus warning against it.
Yeah. But she did such a good job, I thought, of crafting the B story that it would have been so wonderful if she just sort of stuck the landing with the love triangle portion. But the B story part I thought was an important story to tell, which again, I think it's been enough time. I'm going to spoiler alert. The character's a matchmaker, and the B story is she's setting up a woman who ends up getting sexually assaulted on a date by a guy that she matches her with and is having to grapple with the guilt of being the person that introduced her to someone that did something so horrible. So that was a really amazing choice because, when you're telling a story about a matchmaker, like we've seen Emma, we've seen Clueless, we've seen Cruel Intentions, we've seen the last season of Frasier, right? There's been so many stories where a matchmaker is the focal point or makes an appearance, and it's light and it's charming and she's struggling with her own dating life, but is so good at setting up other people, right? But we have not seen the matchmaker with the guilty conscience because she set up someone who got sexually assaulted. Like, I just thought that was really cool to go there, and is unfortunately, it didn't happen to my knowledge to this particular writer who dabbled as a matchmaker at one point, but thank God, like knock on everything in this room, has not happened to any of my clients. And it's a huge part of why I'm a referral only service. But it's happened to people. I've read about stories where that's happened at other companies. And so I loved the choice to tell that story. And I think that the ethics of our industry needs some examining. And I liked that she opened up that conversation. But yeah, the love triangle, not my thing.
But I felt like it was rushed and it was just there for the drama of her professional life. And I thought it did a disservice to that.
Hmm.
how important that was to tell that story. Um, and so to have it be the background and
Yeah.
this sort of the turn at the end just to help give them as a hinge for a story felt like
Hmm.
it was misusing something with that level of gravity and intensity around it.
Love Story, the book by Eric Siegel, does not need a spoiler alert because it mentions that she dies in the opening sentence of the book, which I think is really cool. It talks about how, there was someone who was 25 and she's now dead, and he's going to tell the story, but it's said much more beautifully than that. But yeah, sometimes there are great love stories that don't end happily, and I guess Romeo and Juliet is one of those. But the difference is the writer didn't make you root for that ending, right? Romeo and Juliet, you're like, oh, they get to be together, and even in death, like, and obviously one of them doesn't die, but so but you're rooting for it, right? Like you're rooting for the romance, and that romance includes something bad happening to
Yeah.
somebody. And
But I thought it did an incredible job to what we were talking about earlier about like what are the psychological issues that people are bringing to a relationship that will be the decider of whether they have a happily ever after. And I thought there was one particular episode based around his proposal of her that was just spectacularly done. If you just take away the true life part of it, I just thought the idea of how they navigate two individual people that have big personalities, the issues that they've been grappling with from their past, and also what their ambition is, and just all the different factors that are coming into a relationship from the outside and also from within. It was a really great character study, as well as a relationship, a series about a relationship. So for that, I was like, I loved it. I thought, and the mental health perspective of it was fantastic. I feel like a lot of the new ways we treat romantic storylines are sort of more geared to like what you're saying, the things that we see in real life, and not just like, I think, what was it, the was it 10 Things I Hate About You, another one of those early staples that like, oh,
oh,
it's
but I
just
loved that one.
if she just, is that the one where she's like, she's the nerdy girl, and if she just got rid of the glasses,
No,
she's, oh no, okay,
no.
what's that
10
one?
Things I Hate About You
10,
is the one with Heath Ledger where he's
oh,
serenading her on the football
okay.
field.
What would be like your ideal construction of a romantic story? The one that you've always wished was out there.
I like a happy, I like when characters make the happy decision in the end. That's what I'm always rooting for. It's just, I think there's a misconception that the ending that's the happy one is the one where girl gets the guy, and it doesn't matter if it's the right guy. It's just that's the guy she's been wanting the whole movie, or the guy's been wanting that girl. I think the ending that's happy, I want to see the person not single, because like this is horrible to say. There are a lot of people, there's like a whole movement now that's like anti-boyfriend, like boyfriends are not cool anymore. There was an article in Vogue, boyfriends are embarrassing. um I think having the wrong boyfriend is embarrassing, but having the right one, like nothing can make your life better than being in that relationship that just takes your happiness to the next level. But yeah, you need to be happy on your own first. And so an ending that's happy is a rom-com where the person ends up with the person that they need. And sometimes it's the person they want, but it's not always the person they want. But if they end up with the person they need, I'm a happy camper.
Oh, I like that. I feel like that's the natural ending right there. I like that a
Andrew,
lot.
did you get the ending you wanted or the ending you needed?
Needed. I think it's both. I think it's the perfect both. It served both purposes.
Awesome. Well, thank you
um,
so much for having me on. This was really fun.
yeah, this was really fun. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. All right. Well, hopefully everyone's going to read your book because they absolutely should, whether they're single or not. Oh, I'm gonna do like a tag here, because I just have to mention this. So maybe this is the epilogue. When we were at the book festival together, and you almost matched that couple, that would have been that was like you engineering a romantic movie in real time. And I just have to share that because it was hilarious. It was this older gentleman, to be, you know, politically correct about it. There's nothing to be politically incorrect. I don't even know why I said that.
He's older than you.
An older gentleman.
That is
Yes,
factual.
yes. He comes up and he just, I don't know why he just lingered at our table and he didn't seem to have any interest in anything that we were presenting, our both of our books. And then an older woman comes and they both, and you just start like peppering. We find out they both came here separately to the book event. They're both single. And then you're like, they're both love to read. They're both politically conservative. Let's just put it there. So you're like, oh, perfect. Why don't you go make a date to have coffee together after the book event?
Oh no, Andrew, it was during, I was like, what are you doing right now in an hour? They're serving lunch. There's food trucks. Why don't you take each other? No, I was like, if this is a later dater thing, it's not going to happen. I'm like, this needs to happen right now. But yeah, alas, I was unsuccessful.
Yeah, I know. It was spectacular. It was a movie that was writing itself in real time, and it was amazing. And it's kind of that everything that you want to do where you're like engineering your characters and your story, and you are engineering it with real people. And of course, they both resisted.
Well, I think she would have been game. I felt, so my spidey sense told me it's a combination of two things, and I hope they're not listening to this, but a combination of two things.
I highly doubt it.
I don't know that he felt attracted. I think that was partially it. And the main part was that he had been single for so long that he told himself that he was always going to be single and had made peace with that. And there was no room in the narrative that he'd written for his life and the ending of his life that included getting to be with somebody. Like, it almost felt like he had taken that possibility off the table when we were talking to him. And so, you know, and I have encountered people where, you know, that's the case, and it's typically more that demographic, and it always makes me really sad. And I was like, I'm going to fix it right here, right now. But I do think that if he had been like wildly attracted to her or something, he would have been like, yeah, I could grab a coffee. I could see a coffee in my future. But he had like a disgruntledness to him that, like, he just, I don't know. And I felt like he was like kind of rude to her. By the end, I was like, you dodged a bullet. I'm so sorry I put you in that situation. I don't want you going. Do not go to coffee with this man. But no, I'm always trying to make matches, and I prefer when they're successful ones, and I have a lot of those stories. But yeah, I'm constantly trying to get people together.
Was he the one with the not vax button?
I feel like people are going to read into.
He was not. Yeah, it was a different guy, a different older gentleman.
Honestly, he might have been. But I think the kicker was that I asked what her politics were, and that seemed in alignment with her politics. Yes. It's not yours, it's not mine. But listen, something that I have come to learn, not even learn, but a way I've grown as a matchmaker over the years is if I'm only setting up the kind of people whose opinions I agree with, you know, like, I don't know. I just think the world would be a happier place if everybody found love. And so even if I don't agree with people's choices or their politics or, you know, decisions that they're making, I do believe everyone deserves love. And I do think our world would be a better place if everyone had it. And so, and I also think at the end of the day, most people are good people. Sometimes they make bad decisions. And so I want everyone to find happiness. And I think there will be world peace if everyone found their true love. And so I'm on a mission to make it happen for everyone listening. And to that end, can I share information where they can find me?
Yeah, please do.
Okay. So my website is LJ, for Lauren, my business partner, J for Jaydi, ljmatchmaking.com. If you want to hit me up for matchmaking or coaching. I mostly service the greater LA area for matchmaking, but I coach internationally. And then I also have my book that I want you to buy. It's Your Last First Date, Secrets from a Hollywood Matchmaker. And My Instagram and social media handles are at Match Made in Hollywood. I have a podcast, Match Made in Hollywood, that I co-host with my husband. And most importantly, if you're listening to this, you must really love the sound of Andrew's voice. His writing is even better, truly. He is beyond talented. And if you're listening to this podcast, like, just take an extra 2 seconds and look up Hell or High Winter, his incredible book, and put in the comments what you think about it.
Oh, shucks. I thought you were going to go to like any singles. So...
Well,
no,
yes.
no, no,
okay,
no.
So
we're not going to go there.
We're
not going to go
there.
there.
Oh no, let's go there. Let's go there.
No.
Comment. Send Andrew a DM if you like his book. Send me a DM if you like Andrew.
Okay, good. I'm gonna have you.
How's that for the ending that you need?
There we go. There we go. The ending I need, not quite what I wanted. So we got one of the two. All right, this was.
I'll
great.
let you choose your own ending.
Oh, God.
Now you have two
Okay.
to choose from.
Great.
On that note.
On that note, goodbye.
So here's the thing that stuck with me. The happy ending isn't the person you want. It's the person you need. Ooh. This has been Plotting About. Go buy Andrew and Jaydi's books, Hell or High Winter and Your Last First Date. See you next time.